Hi everyone, welcome to the recorded session of Beyond Climate Mitigation, our ninth session of our poster symposium series, which highlights the accomplishments of the 2021 Civic Spark Fellow cohort. Unfortunately, during the live session, we had some technical difficulties, and the first two fellows presenting were not recorded during our live session. So we've added their presentations back in post-production. Tim Mock, our program implementation manager, facilitated this live session. So without further ado, I will hand it over to the fellows to tell you a little bit more about their projects. Up first, we will be hearing from Julian Nesbitt, who is serving with the California State Coastal Conservancy, and Sarah Wickman, who is serving with the County of Humboldt.
My name is Julian Nesbitt, and my fellowship is with the California State Coastal Conservancy. And the themes around my project were about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or JEDI, along the California coast. So the Conservancy acts as an agency that gives out funding for different environmental projects all across the California coast. And they range from habitat protection and restoration to improving public access to natural areas to working on climate adaptation in the face of issues like climate change and sea level rise. So one of my main projects was adding and modifying that project selection criteria, which the staff uses to evaluate proposals sent in by different environmental organizations for these projects. And the reason we wanted to update this criteria was because we wanted to reflect and show a better commitment to engaging underserved communities in California. These are communities we historically haven't served in the past, low-income communities, minority communities, those communities that are more at risk of these environmental issues like sea level rise. So the idea behind it is that when future grantees apply for our money for these projects, they're seeing the criteria and that equitable lens, and therefore they incorporate that into their projects to be more competitive for our funding. So that's how we're thinking how to make tangible changes to the way the environmental sector works. And so the process was we drafted up the new and revised criteria, and we got feedback by sending out this criteria to conservancy partners, stakeholders, past grantees, eventually opened up to the public too. And so the idea was after all this feedback about what to add and what to take out and how to word these certain criteria, then we'd have something that's good to go. And so we came up with these 6 new ones, and these last 4 are the ones especially related to that engagement of underserved communities. So those are sustainable or resilient over the project lifespan, delivers multiple benefits and significant positive impact. And here in this gray box are just a little example of what multiple benefits for communities look like in environmental projects. The idea behind that is that the more benefits you check off, the more beneficial your project will be for your community overall. The project will be planned with meaningful community support. So that means community members and community leaders are involved in the whole process of the project, the implementation, the planning, the actual carrying out, and concluding the project as well. And then number 6 is implementation of tribal engagement wherever possible. So the idea behind this is that all these projects will be on California land that was historically indigenous land or is. And so it's good to have that connection with the tribes in your area. So make sure you're respecting the culture, land acknowledgement, signage, whatever you can. We want to see that attempts happen. And so when we came up with this criteria, we got more feedback, and the results have overall been very positive. The main concern has been regarding the 6 criteria about tribal engagement. We've had organizations we've worked with say that they struggle to make that two-way communication happen. They'll reach out, but they won't hear a response for a long time from these tribes. And that's something we struggle with at the Conservancy as well. So this is something that will just be ongoing topic of discussion, and we'll just need to figure out how to keep this momentum forward. So the idea behind this criteria is that we'll present them to the September board meeting to the Conservancy board, and it'll be authorized. And again, in the future grantees will incorporate all these equitable aspects into their projects to truly make positive change there. Next slide. And another part of my project was working on these grantee surveys. So the grant application and grant management. And it is that the staff wants to improve the grant applications themselves and how the grant is managed once a grantee is approved. So we want to reduce those barriers for those smaller or community-based nonprofits that have a more direct link to their community members and will have the most impact. So we made these customer service surveys, we put them into SurveyMonkey, and next slide. And so we sent them out. So we had staff members send out those surveys to past grantees and grantees they're currently working with. And this is an ongoing process as well. We've had 57 completed grant application surveys, mostly from those nonprofits. And again, it's also very positive results. Most applicants agreed it was the right length. There was enough space to really convey the scope of their projects. The staff were very helpful in answering questions, making clear what types of activities were allowed and what weren't. And most applicants took about 10 to 25 hours to finish, which we think is a good ballpark. And we also gave space for applicants to further explain what they mean by their answers. And we had some more further feedback about where we could improve. Some people still thought the length was a bit tight. They couldn't tell the whole narrative of their project. Others thought there was too much emphasis on the technical stuff, while they weren't given enough time to really hone in on the project description. So just little comments here and there about that. But overall, again, very positive. And as you can see, here are some of those answers in graph form, and that's what they look like on SurveyMonkey. And next slide. And that concludes a little portion of my CivicSpark project. And again, the objective was with the criteria, was to further show how we can tangibly make improvements in JEDI areas and specifically work with those historically underserved communities and really reach out to the areas that could use more environmental resilience work. And in turn with the surveys, this way we'll be better working with those smaller organizations that have the most impact on the community members and will have that direct link that we don't really have as a state agency. So overall, we're really making good work and actually being tangible with making positive change.
My name is Sarah Wickman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Civic Spark Fellow for Humboldt County's Planning and Building Department, working on the Regional Sea Level Rise Planning Feasibility Study. Thank you all for watching my presentation. I'm speaking to you from traditional Wiyot land, and I would like to acknowledge that the Humboldt Bay region I will be speaking of for this project contains many significant cultural sites, ancestral villages, and traditional resources. Humboldt Bay itself actually has the highest rate of relative sea level rise on the west coast of the United States. Due to this and a long history of landscape modification in the bay, we have a vast array of assets and critical infrastructure at risk from rising sea levels within the next 50 years. For this reason, we at Humboldt County have found ourselves on the front lines of climate change and have undertaken a feasibility study for regional collaboration in order to properly address sea level rise impacts within the mosaic of federal, state, and local jurisdictional boundaries, as well as regulatory authority found in the Humboldt Bay region. This feasibility study was created from a grant by the California Coastal Commission with funds from California Cap and Trade Program after a presentation in 2019 by a local consultant and my now colleague, Alderon Laird, on the condition of levees and roadways in Humboldt County in the face of sea level rise. I was tasked with planning and initiating the outreach program for the study, which is the first of 3 stages planned for this project and is projected to end mid-2022. In this outreach program, I created an inventory of stakeholders involved or possibly impacted by sea level rise and implemented 2 stakeholder outreach surveys based on my inventory. The 2 umbrella stakeholder groups targeted were the general public and coastal professionals. For the general public, we made a month-long 2-pronged approach in order to engage as much of the public as possible, particularly coastal landowners. Our online approach was created on a website specific to local government surveys and public input. It was released by members of the local press in print, online, and on the radio. It was emailed to representatives of the Farm Bureau for further dissemination among landowners, emailed to a list of interested stakeholders from sea level rise vulnerable communities, and further announced personally at board meetings for local agencies and organizations. Because we are a rural county with limited internet connection options, there was also a paper copy of surveys mailed to landowners with contact information registered at the land assessor's office for parcels within 1 meter of the sea level rise inundation zone. A pile of copies were also provided at the Humboldt County Planning Office front desk. And all of these paper copies included pre-stamped and addressed envelopes in order to increase participation. The Coastal Professional Survey was entirely online and was hosted on the website SurveyMonkey. Our definition of coastal professionals came from Moser et al. 2018 California Needs Assessment and were defined as individuals involved in California coastal resource management, conservation, and protection from coastal hazards. Therefore, the professionals we surveyed included planners, resource managers, public works engineers, transportation managers, emergency response managers, harbor managers, elected officials, tribal organizations, as well as representatives from environmental organizations working on coastal issues. The survey instrument was made entirely online in partnership with HSU and contained personalized links to track participation and prevent double participation. Questions in the survey were designed to identify possible coordination frameworks and opportunities. This data collection process for the survey was also a month long, although the drafting process for the survey was extended by several months in order to properly address the survey goals brought forward by both the county as well as HSU. Following the inventory and survey, we initiated a key stakeholder interview process in order to confirm our stakeholder descriptions, as well as transition into the second phase of the study, which was research. Specifically, research into potential regulatory frameworks, identifying cross-jurisdictional coordination opportunities, identifying funding frameworks and opportunities, and identifying regulatory/feasibility pathways. This consisted of 17 stakeholder groups, such as the Wiyot Tribe, the City of Arcata, the City of Eureka, Caltrans, Cal Fish and Wildlife, PG&E, and many more, who were previously surveyed in the Coastal Professional Survey. A community workshop to report out on survey results and a community workshop to review our research findings are planned for later this year and early 2022. All of this data we collected will be important for the final stage of the study, which is a feasibility report for public consumption. Coming back to survey implementation for a moment, although our survey results are still in the process of being analyzed by HSU and the county, our initial results and public comment show a need to increase communication and education between stakeholders. Luckily, a majority of both the general public and coastal professional survey participants rated regional coordination as either important or very important, so the feasibility of a regional approach based on public acceptance is pretty high. Next slide, please. I would like to highlight the importance of our varied implementation methods. Here's a glimpse into the 3 different surveys instruments used. Key differences in the mail-in survey results versus the online survey results came from age demographics and preferred modes of communication. Online survey respondents' age ranges were fairly spread out at roughly 27% over age 64, 33% 45 to 64, 20% 35 to 44, and 16% 18 to 34-year-olds. The mail-in survey, however, was predominantly respondents over 64 years of age at 74%, while 22% of respondents were 45 to 64, 4% were 35 to 44, and there were no respondents under age 34. For modes of communication, online survey respondents preferred email at 46%, while mail-in respondents preferred email 23%. Online survey respondents preferred dedicated webpage at 38.5%, while 28.7% of mail-in survey respondents preferred it. Mail-in survey respondents favored radio announcements, phone calls, and mail. And because these respondents were able to write in the margins, we were also given extensive public comment through this method, such as a message of thanks from a lovely 98-year-old resident concerned for their grandchildren. All 3 surveys showed a disconnect between stakeholder groups and even individuals in an organization. Some organizations had different internal understanding of sea level rise projections, and among the public, only 49% believe that Humboldt Bay is currently being affected by sea level rise despite yearly events. Overall, this coordination effort has been a success in highlighting community concerns and possible future collaboration. Combined with the stakeholder interview, we were able to locate an important missing sea level rise document for a stakeholder, identify a miscommunication between 2 stakeholders, connect one stakeholder who needed fill soil with another that was trying to get rid of it, and gather valuable contact information. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time and consideration.
I'm going to hand it off to Anne Shalamoff. Take it away, Anne.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Tim. My name is Anne Shalamoff, and I'm serving at Climate Resolve, a nonprofit based out of downtown Los Angeles. Today, I will be discussing regional collaboration and intersectoral partnerships for furthering climate equity. In the past year, I've been working on two rather different yet still integrally related projects. The first is the Inland Southern California Climate Collaborative, or ISC3, which is a peer support and knowledge exchange network for senior environmental practitioners in San Bernardino, Riverside, and Imperial counties, with its primary audience consisting of local government staff. The second is Partners Advancing Climate Equity, or PACE, which is a capacity building program for frontline environmental justice leaders to connect with peers, take their skills to the next level, and catalyze transformative change. Both of these efforts come out of Senator Leva's Senate Bill 1072, which establishes the California Strategic Growth Council as the administrator for regional climate collaboratives to assist under-resourced communities in acquiring funding for climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. This work is built on the understanding that climate change and other environmental challenges are fundamentally interdisciplinary and complex. Collaboration, as opposed to competition, is necessary in addressing climate impacts, which are indifferent to jurisdictional boundaries or organizational structures. The nature of these efforts is particularly important in the low-income, BIPOC, and rural communities served by both ISC3 and PACE, as these marginalized populations have historically been excluded from policy decision-making and proportionate funding allocations. In doing this meaningful yet challenging work, we create replicable models for effective capacity building, collaborative grant writing and project work, and meaningful community engagement that we share throughout California and beyond. Slide, please. The Inland Southern California Climate Collaborative, or ISC3, is centered around monthly member meetings featuring policy engagement, connection to funding opportunities, and knowledge exchange through a supportive peer network. To give some examples, in January, Nikki Buffa, Council on Environmental Quality for the Biden Transition Team, hosted a listening session where ISC3 members shared their experiences with California climate investments and the Cap and Trade program to inform potential future federal legislation as the Biden administration considers enacting stricter federal climate policy. In June, Commissioner Andrew McAllister of the California Energy Commission himself joined us to share upcoming changes to the California Energy Building Code. In addition to planning, organizing, and co-hosting these monthly meetings, I've been compiling a biweekly newsletter of relevant articles, events, and funding opportunities relevant to stakeholders in the region, and conducting outreach and recruitment, increasing our total active membership by 38%. Slide, please. In order to foster real human relationships and encourage government staff to shed their masks of distant professionalism, we begin each meeting with a silly icebreaker activity that is still grounded in environmental issues relevant to inland Southern California. In the image you see here, ISC3 members filled out a bingo card with regionally relevant sustainability facts about themselves. Slide, please. Now, shifting gears to Partners Advancing Climate Equity. PACE consists of two phases, each roughly 6 months in length. In phase 1, our 22 PACE leaders participate in alternating weekly full cohort sessions and learning groups, in addition to a selection of optional offerings, including supplemental trainings, peer exchanges, and office hours. In tandem, they each develop a community needs assessment, a written report that supports PACE leaders in identifying actionable strategies to advance their community's vision for climate equity and build longer-term capacity through the vast curriculum, consisting of the vision, assessment, strategies, and timeline modules. Phase 2 is more independent, with targeted technical assistance for grant writing, project implementation, and even organizational restructuring, if needed. The entire curriculum, along with a resource library and detailed final report, will be published online at the conclusion of Phase 2 to provide a replicable model that can be adapted by interested parties. For context, we are currently wrapping up Phase 1 and beginning to transition into Phase 2. Next slide, please. Here is just a quick picture of some of our PACE leaders at our very first launch full cohort session back in February. We have a total of 22 leaders, including 5 tribal representatives. Next slide, please. And finally, lastly, I wanted to show you this virtual quilt of vision boards created by our PACE leaders, where they each visually illustrated what an equitable climate future could look like in their individual communities. Next slide. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Great job, Anne. Thank you so much for your presentation. You've been up to a lot. You've been pretty busy, huh? That was a lot. I'm curious, I mean, that out back on your first slide for the poster, there were so many logos down there in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm curious if you can share just some reflections on what it's been like to work with so many different organizations and any kind of overarching takeaways you've had from all of that networking you've been up to.
That's a great question. I think the inland Southern California region is very unique. The Riverside, San Bernardino, Ontario metropolitan area is actually currently seeing the fastest growth in rent prices of anywhere in the United States. There's a big population boom happening right now. And historically, the region has been more rural and more politically conservative. But right now, there are a lot of shifts happening with elected officials, with the wealth and age demographics of those living in the region. So something I've tried to be very aware of, and I talk about this at length in my transition report, is that it is really important to remember that regions are very diverse. These 3 counties that I'm working in cover hundreds, if not thousands of square miles. And the needs of a tribal community next to the Arizona border is going to be very different than the needs of a forested community in the mountains, which is going to be really different than the needs of the city of Riverside. So I've really tried to form individual relationships that acknowledge the different political backgrounds, financial constraints, and cultural differences, and differences in climate impacts that are being felt between these different organizations, governments, and stakeholders.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering that question. Lot to chew on there. For a question we got in the chat box from Abby, are all of the participants in the PACE program from phase 1 moving on to phase 2 with the technical assistance component of the program?
Yes. And something I didn't mention, but something that I think makes our program really unique, is that we are actually providing financial compensation to our PACE leaders. We're expecting them to put in about 15 hours a month on the different components of this program, in addition to them typically having full-time jobs. So we are paying them 4 installments of $2,000 for a total of $8,000. So they've received half of that participant support and they received the other half. So that I think is also partially an incentive for continued participation. We did unfortunately have a single PACE leader who passed away from a chronic condition pretty early into the program. So they will not be continuing on. And we also had another PACE leader who had some pretty significant capacity limitations. So they were able to find a colleague to replace them. But overall, yes, it is the same cohort moving from phase 1 to phase 2.
Thank you, Anne. And my sympathies for that loss. I'm sure that was incredibly challenging. Thank you so much for this deep work you've been doing with Climate Resolve. Wonderful. Well, one more round of applause for Anne. Really appreciate your service. Thank you so much. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Tim.
Great, thanks Kaylee, and thanks Anne again. And just like to pass it off to our next presenter, Tori Brewster. Take it away, Tori.
Hello, hi, I'm Tori Brewster. This year, I worked on 3 projects. I worked for the Coachella Valley Association of Governments and the Coachella Valley Conservation Commission. One of these projects involved developing an urban greening guidebook for the Coachella Valley Association of Governments. The Energy and Environmental Resources Committee established that the region needed more information and resources on urban greening to to promote sustainable tree planting programs. This presentation doesn't cover the full scope of the guidebook, but it covers the elements that I believe most replicable and other important urban greening considerations. The guidebook was created to provide information on planning and program management, best locations for tree planting, management resources, and a list of trees suitable for the desert region. We called this a tree palette. Members of the Energy and Environmental Resources Committee were particularly interested in the tree palette. In our case, we needed a list of desert-friendly trees that have adapted to increasing temperatures and pest problems in the region. When researching trees appropriate for your respective region, it's important to contact local experts and research local publications that recommend trees suitable for your particular climate. You can also use CalScape to find native species suitable for your region. Native species tend to be more adapted to your regional climate, but there are plenty of non-native species that can be recommended by experts as well. We used Lush and Efficient to create a list of desert-friendly trees. Lush and Efficient was published by the Desert Water Agency, and we consulted local landscape architects, landscape consultants, and horticulturists who provided insight and suggested trees best suited for the region. I do want to note that heat and pests become a larger issue for our region. More species have been affected by these issues, and getting expert opinions on our list was useful. Experts have a better understanding on tree management issues that their clients are facing, a more updated perspective on these increasing issues and what impact they have on particular species. So once you establish a tree palette and you've created a list of trees that are suited for your region, it's important to define the characteristics about each of these species. Cities and even residents are going to want to know about these particular characteristics, what type of seed the tree drops. This has to do with the litter component. Does it drop flowers? Does it drop berries or thorns? They're also concerned about how tall the tree will be at maturity. So it's important to consider, planners want to consider how the height of a tree so they can avoid placing tall trees under power lines. Most of these characteristics can be found using the Urban Forestry Ecosystem Institute created by Cal Poly, as well as WCALS, which is the Water Classification of Landscape Species. That provides information on moisture required by different species. iTree can be used for energy and carbon sequestration information. And once these characteristics have been defined into a tree palette, it's also important to consider where this beautiful list of trees, where you're going to plant them, and what are the important considerations to note about planting these trees. The desert region is mostly concerned about heat and utilizing trees as a cooling service for sidewalks, bus stops, and park benches. For the purpose of the Urban Greening Guidebook if the purpose of your urban greening project is to provide cooling services, you're going to need to consider distributing shade equitably. Next slide, please. So in this picture, you'll be able to see the importance of canopy cover. Lack of canopy cover increases temperature. It deters people from going outside and using green spaces. Increased heat can cause health-related problems for communities. And underserved communities are especially and historically at risk of low tree and canopy cover. As you can see, it's important to consider how close these trees are planted and how often you're placing shade trees on your sidewalks. The next slide will show how important it is for trees to have enough room to grow. Next slide, please. So you have to consider spatial constraints. Trees need enough room to grow, and it's important to consider how much room and how big the plot is. As you can see, this tree on the left has little room to grow and little canopy cover and shade for the parking lots. Whereas the tree on the right has more room to grow and it provides a great amount of shade. So you have to consider cooling properties how often you're planting shade trees, and the amount of room that you have for your species to grow. And finally, in the last slide, it's important to consider right tree, right place. Consider which trees are most suitable for the specific area. For example, palm trees are beautiful, but they provide little shade and cooling services. They're better suited for medians. They look beautiful in medians, but they don't provide shade for sidewalks. So you can see this picture on the left. You have all these beautiful palms, but they're not providing a lot of shade. So it's a great place to put them in the medians, whereas you would not want a beautiful shade tree with a large canopy cover in the medians, because you're not providing a cooling service for pedestrians and maybe walkways, bikers. Right tree also refers to the quality of the tree selected. Another important consideration, if there's any pest issues when you're picking up a tree from a nursery. You also want to consider right place in terms of placement and how close trees are to sidewalks. Are the tree, when they reach maturity, will the root systems interfere with sidewalks, roadways? These are other aspects to consider when planting a tree. That's why the characteristics that I spoke about earlier are necessary to consider, since you don't want to have a great tree placed in the wrong spot. And that is what I've been working on this last year. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer questions.
Awesome. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Tori. Great. We'd be happy to take any questions from the group. I have a quick question for you. As you've been working in the urban greening space and have clearly learned so much, I think, through your project, I'm curious, did you have a background in urban greening before starting this work? And how much of this has been kind of just learning as you're going through your service project?
Yes, well, I actually have not had much experience in urban greening other than my studies and knowing that urban greening has carbon sequestration potential, cooling benefits. But this year was a great experience for me to dive in and really see all the benefits that trees provide a community. There's so many social health benefits that coincide with tree planting and urban greening initiatives. And it can be community building. So I haven't had much experience, but I'm so thrilled to have the ability to learn from the experts that we've been speaking with. They've provided so much information on maintenance issues, especially in the desert and in other regions. So it's been a great starting point in my time with urban greening, and I'm excited to pursue this further.
Awesome. Yeah, really, really happy to hear that. And I think just your last few slides of showing examples of what right placement looks like and all the different factors you have to keep in mind really shows how much you have dug into this type of work and your passion for it. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the group? Oh, sorry, I see a hand raised. Let me go ahead, please take it away. I'm not sure if we're able to hear you. I think it's Nikki. Maybe if you can try one more time to unmute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. All good. Thank you, Nikki.
There we go. I was double muted. Sorry, I'm calling in on a phone. Hi, my name is Nikki, and I was just wondering, as part of this guidebook, and apologies if I missed it, but did you also look into guidance for long-term maintenance considerations. I heard a little bit about like the considerations for long-term growth and the root systems as they grow into sidewalks. I'm just curious about other kinds of aspects that come up, like branch management, storm management, pollen management, those sorts of aspects. Wondering how much you came up across those.
Of course, great question. I wish that we could have had more time to work and research management practices. The region is facing high tree mortality rates, and some next steps for the region are going to be widespread educational resources for the region and maintenance operators as well as residents. We learned from our conversations with experts how important these conversations need to be had. A lot of trees are suffering from pests and poor management practices. So the guidebook provides resources that have information on proper management practices. We used the publication Lush and Efficient from the Desert Water Agency, and they provided a huge guidebook with a list of trees suitable for the region. They also provided information on maintenance and management practices that are important to consider. We didn't have the ability to rewrite another management guidebook, but I'm hopeful that the region is going in this direction of urban greening, and they're soon going to be practicing more educational development of tree management practices.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, great question, Nikki. And it sounds like there's a lot more to come. Thank you, Tori. We've got one more question, sorry, in the chat box. And then I think we'll go ahead and move on to our last presentation of the day. But from Shauna, what considerations are there for folks using this book who are working on land where poor management practices already exist?
So one thing we wanted to address at the start of our guidebook was that the issue around these poor management tactics, they exist, and we wanted to note what the largest issues were. So we highlighted some of the top maintenance problems that were highlighted by our experts, and we wanted to bring that to the attention of both residents and city officials so they understood what the issues are. And now that they know what the issues are, the biggest management problems the region's facing, they can use this to research and work with these experts to develop better management practices. And I'm glad that we were able to establish what these issues are, and we're able to highlight those in the guidebook, so at least residents and cities know that these exist, and these are some of the major issues involved with tree planting programs.
Awesome, super helpful. Thank you so much, Tori. Another round of virtual clapping hands for you. Thank you again for your service and fantastic presentation. And thank you to the audience for sticking around. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Tim for our last presentation of the day.
All right. Thanks again, Tori. And now I'm just going to hand it off to Claire Casinadui for our final presentation. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Casinaduni, and I am currently speaking to you from Duwamish land. And I am the Civic Spark Fellow for the nonprofit Sierra Business Council, or SBC. Could you go to the next slide, Tim? Sorry. Awesome. So I kind of have a unique project. It's like going to be a bit difficult to go into detail just because I had two separate projects and I was housed in a nonprofit. So this is going to be really high level, but then obviously if there are questions, I'm happy to answer any of them. So a bit of a background on Sierra Business Council. It's located in Truckee, California, which is north of Lake Tahoe. And it's a nonprofit that's focused on the triple bottom line, which is like economic, environmental, and social resilience specific to the Sierra Nevada region. And so below there on the left are the 3 focus areas. And so it's economic empowerment, regional advocacy, and climate action. And both the programs that I worked in are under climate action. And could you go to the next slide, Tim? Thanks. So for Plumas County, that was under one of the programs that we have, which is the Sierra Climate Adaptation and Mitigation Partnership, or Sierra CAMP. And so this project is, so I was working under Sierra CAMP specifically on the Sierra Nevada Regional Climate Vulnerability Assessment, which is a project of Sierra CAMP that's seeking to help Sierra Nevada communities prepare for climate change by examining social, economic, and environmental vulnerabilities that are specific to the Sierra Nevada region. And a piece of that project is also providing technical assistance. And that is to increase capacity and help jurisdictions comply with SB 379, which is a Senate bill that was passed in 2015 that is mandating that local jurisdictions adopt climate planning and climate adaptation work into the safety element of their general plans. So my work with Plumas County was to provide and basically pilot that technical assistance piece and to help Plumas County meet SB 379 by writing a climate vulnerability assessment for them. And then also I worked on like the larger vulnerability assessment with the Sierra Camp program. And then on the other program side, I was working with Nevada County to also in the climate action kind of category of SBC with the climate and energy team to assist the county in EAP implementation and progress through both a community working group and then also through county efforts. And then Tim, sorry, could you go back to my poster? So like 2 slides back. Thanks so much. So again, just because it's like really hard to get into the weeds of the projects, just because they're so different, I'm just going to go over like the main goals and then like the main accomplishments. So for Nevada County, like I said, the goal was to support implementation of the Energy Action Plan, or EAP. And that was through both the municipal side with energy efficiency and resiliency projects, and then also by supporting their community working group. And the community working group is essentially made up of very stoked community members who are trying to implement the Energy Action Plan through the community side. And so big accomplishments on this side of my project was in the county side, I held a bunch of department head meetings to inform and inquire about EAP implementation, and then presented my findings to the county. And so basically I got kind of a feel of, did folks in the county know about the EAP and was it a priority? And then also talked about recommendations I had after getting to know progress that was happening. I was able to like talk about next steps and how to implement it. And then through the working group, I worked on a energy efficiency toolkit, which is essentially a big document that has tips for energy and water efficiency for residents and businesses, and then also created a biggest bang for your buck guide, which is just like a 1-pager that talks about quick tips for folks. And so both of these can hopefully be used by both the county and the working group going forward in supplement to the Energy Action Plan. And then on the Plumas County side of things, it's a little bit more straightforward, but also more time consuming, I guess, and complicated. Is we had the larger vulnerability assessment, which I helped work on. And then, like I said, there was the goal of the technical assistance component, which is writing a vulnerability assessment specific to Plumas County. And so the goal was to write a vulnerability assessment and also assist with a set of adaptation strategies. And so accomplishments on that side of my project was I assisted with the larger vulnerability assessment, and that specifically kind of involved many different components that were smaller, but also helped draft the socioeconomic profiles, which are essentially just a conglomerate of data that's focused on socioeconomic indicators in the Sierra Nevada. And then also I wrote Plumas County's vulnerability assessment and drafted a set of adaptation strategies. And then could you go to my last slide, Tim? Okay, and so here is like a tiny picture of what the toolkit looks like, just for a little bit of a visual. And yeah, so that's kind of like a wrap up, I guess, of like the larger deliverables. And next slide. Yeah, and that sort of wraps it up on the highest level, but I'm definitely available to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Claire. Great job with your presentation, and you did a great job of sharing about both projects. I know it's hard to squeeze that all into the time we have here today, but fantastic job. So folks, again, you know the drill. If you got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box or use the raise hand feature. We've got one right away from Simone Cordery-Cotter, one of our very own. Please go ahead, Simone.
Hi, Claire. Fantastic presentation. Thank you. I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the challenges of doing a sort of like cross-sectoral project like this with the socioeconomic approaches also interacting with some of the climate projections.
In regards to the vulnerability assessment?
Yes.
Yes, so it's very challenging, I guess, to just kind of like hold all those parts in one. And it's interesting because like for the Plumas County vulnerability assessment, it's essentially a baby report of the larger one that we're doing for the whole Sierra Nevada. And so there are just like a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different things to consider. And also it's really difficult to like kind of evaluate climate projections on every indicator when there's lots of unexpected consequences that are sure to happen. And then also it's really hard to like wrap your hands around like, this is what's definitely going to be impacted. This is like potentially going to be impacted. And then to evaluate the vulnerability in that situation. So I found it to be challenging because a lot of it seems almost subjective. And so to kind of really stick to the data and how to incorporate that into a very uncertain future has been challenging. But the nice thing is that there's so many people who have been going about this process because it is a Senate bill and different jurisdictions have to comply with it. There's just like a lot of resources and other examples from folks of going about that process. So that's been really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire. You're getting some great shout outs in the chat box right now. I've got a question for you. I saw in your bio that you will be moving on to become a judicial fellow with the California Capital Fellows Program. Congratulations. We've had a couple of Civic Sparkies before you also follow that path and become a Capital Fellow after the program. Since you worked in Nevada County and it looks like you're going to continue to work in the area as a Capital Fellow, curious if you can share a little bit of what you're excited about for your next chapter.
Yeah. Well, I'm very unfamiliar with the judicial system, so this will be like a totally new experience. Most of my experience and work thus far has been in like the climate arena. So I'm just really excited to learn about a new field and also kind of look at it through the lens of climate change, because I think you can do that with everything. Yeah, but I'm excited to be able to go forward and learn more about the justice system and also hopefully learn from the rest of my cohort. I think it'll be just a really cool experience. And it's also like grad school mixed with like on the job sort of. So you get credits and then you also get to apply it directly. And I think that'll be really interesting as well.
Awesome. Well, please keep us updated and best of luck to you. Thank you so much for your service and for this awesome presentation today. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Tim to close us out.
All right. That is the end of today's presentations. Thanks everyone for attending today's session Beyond Climate Mitigation. Just take some time now to give some additional kudos in the chat for our 6 fellows today and in emojis and lift them up. Thank you, Julian, Kaylin, Sarah, Anne, Tori, and Claire. Incredible presentations, a lot of great hard work, and thanks for supporting these projects throughout the state. And for site supervisors still on the line, thank you for supporting your Civic Spark Fellows. Really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to working with folks moving forward. And we have, before I talk about what's on the slide here, we have one more poster presentation. It's the last one of the series. It's tomorrow, 1 p.m. via Zoom. I'm gonna chat it here so folks can register and attend our last session. It's also, that link is also the same one you can use to register for the graduation ceremony, which is on the slide right now, July 29th, 1 to 2:30. That's the day before most of our fellows' last day of service. So we're especially excited to be congratulating them for 11 months of service on the 29th. So hope to see you all at maybe tomorrow's presentation and at graduation. And with that, looks like we're ending a little early, and that's okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thanks again to our awesome presenters for a good year. Bye, everybody.